Welcome, gentlemen. You're watching the Ruslan Belov channel. Today is one of those days when multiple front sectors demand attention simultaneously. And when you step back and look at the full picture, something fundamentally new begins to take shape. Before we dive in, a genuine request. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. YouTube is actively suppressing this kind of content, shadow banning it, and simply not delivering it to our own subscribers. The bell notification is the only reliable way to make sure you actually receive new episodes. It takes 5 seconds, but it means everything to this channel. Now, let's get into it. Sumy sector, quiet build-up before the storm. We open on the Sumy front, where the Russian army continues its methodical, unhurried work, improving positions without fanfare, without dramatic announcements. Today's corrections along the eastern flank are modest in scale, but meaningful in intent. In the area of Maritime, Russian units secured control of a small forested tract running directly along the state border. On the surface, this looks like a minor footnote. In practice, these woodland wedges are precisely what armies use for concealed approach routes and equipment dispersal. Simultaneously, Russian forces straightened their line between Maritime and Pokrovsk, a classic sign of deliberate preparation for the next phase of active operations. The key point to understand here: the Russian army is not rushing on the Sumy axis. There are no assaults yet on Ryaznoye, Novodmitrivka, or Mykolaiivka. And this is not weakness. This is the textbook operational pause. Force concentration, regrouping, reserve pull forward. The punch is being loaded before it is thrown. What makes today notable is that Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief General Syrsky himself publicly confirmed it. The Russian side is completing a large-scale regrouping and could transition to active offensive operations at any moment. Syrsky pointedly declined to name a specific direction, but the statement itself reveals the anxiety within Ukrainian command. When the opposing side openly acknowledges an impending blow, it means the pressure is already being felt across the entire length of the front. Kharkiv direction. Logistics as the target. Last night, Kharkiv and the broader Kharkiv region once again came under strikes. Vovchansk was hit, a town sitting astride the key supply artery linking Kiev, Kharkiv, and Sumy. The city of Kharkiv itself was struck simultaneously. Several days ago, the central locomotive depot of Kharkiv, a critical rail hub for the movement of personnel and equipment, was targeted as well. The logic here is unmistakable. When strikes aren't simply hitting military hardware, but are systematically dismantling the logistics architecture of the enemy. That is the signature of a forthcoming offensive. The degradation of Ukrainian supply infrastructure on the Kharkiv axis, combined with Russian force buildup near Kupansk and on the Vovchansk sector, paints a very clear picture. Kharkiv is a priority target for the Russian summer campaign. The Zolochiv direction deserves separate mention. Strike intensity against Ukrainian positions there has spiked sharply in recent days. Russian units have improved their foothold in the Veterinan area and continue to develop earlier gains in the Sotnitske Kozacha district. Movement along this flank looks inevitable. On the northern Kharkiv sector, Russian forces have already pushed beyond Veterinane and are now setting conditions for advances toward Shevchenko and Khranev to the south, and toward Chervona Zoria and Akop to the northeast. The flanking threats are multiplying. Vovchansk sector, the bridgehead on the river. The Vovchansk sector today provides some of the richest analytical material on the entire front. Over the past several days, Russian units have substantially improved their position in the area of Pokaliana, a small settlement between Vovchansky Khutori and Zibine. Multiple analysts now report that the entirety of Pokaliana is effectively within the Russian infiltration zone. Official confirmation from the Russian Ministry of Defense and Northern Group of Forces is a matter of days, not weeks. Meanwhile, fierce fighting continues for Bakovi and Okremivka along the Vovcha River. These settlements, together with the woodland to their west, have already been reclassified by multiple cartographers into the grey zone, the zone of operational uncertainty. When several independent analysts simultaneously begin recoloring the same patch of the map, it is a reliable signal that the situation on the ground is shifting decisively. The strategic significance of all this is difficult to overstate. Establishing a Russian bridgehead on the western bank of the Vovcha creates the launching pad for a large-scale push deep into Kharkiv Oblast. Combined with the concurrent conclusion of the battle for Kupiansk, this bridgehead forms one blade of a double strike aimed at northeastern Kharkiv region. It is already being discussed under a working operational name, the Pechenez Offensive, with the Pechenez Reservoir and surrounding territory identified as the next operational objective. Kupiansk, the end of a battle. This is arguably the biggest story of the day. Chief of the Russian General Staff General Gerasimov declared several days ago that the battle for the eastern bank of the Oskil River was over. Today, events have moved further, and on a considerably larger scale. Based on information from multiple analysts with ground-level connections on both sides of the front, the Ukrainian army has withdrawn from its positions in western Kupiansk, pulling back to what it considers more defensible lines. The bulk of western Kupiansk has already been reclassified by cartographers into the grey zone, territory that has de facto left Ukrainian control. Pro-Russian sources are publishing footage from the southwestern part of the city. Russian fighters conducting clearance of former Ukrainian positions, demolishing basement structures rather than conducting traditional mine clearance. The pace of advance simply doesn't allow for the slower approach. A caveat is warranted. The geographic attribution of the published footage raises questions. When the structures in the frame are analyzed in detail, the match with the stated coordinates is not convincing. The footage may have been recorded elsewhere on the Kupiansk axis. We await confirmation from analysts with more precise geolocation tools. That said, the overall picture is unambiguous. Kupiansk as an operational entity is passing under Russian control, and this reshapes the entire force calculus on the northern flank. The city becomes a powerful staging ground for the accumulation of troops and equipment. Paired with the Vovchansk bridgehead, it creates a double strike into Kharkiv Oblast. From the northeast via Kupiansk, toward Balaklia, Izium and beyond. From the north via the Vovcha, toward the Pechenez Reservoir and the southeastern outskirts of Kharkiv. It bears remembering that these very territories, Balaklia, Izium, Kupiansk, were held by Russian forces from spring through autumn of 2022 until the Ukrainian counter-offensive. History is moving in circles, but now under fundamentally different conditions. Sloviansk direction, Donyland and reality. Before addressing the military situation on the Sloviansk sector, we cannot ignore a remarkable diplomatic curiosity reported by the New York Times. According to the publication, during recent negotiations between the Ukrainian delegation and American representatives, the Ukrainian side proposed renaming the remaining portion of the Donetsk region, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Dobropilya, Kostiantynivka, and surrounding territories, abandoning their historical names in favor of the term Donyland. The decoding is straightforward. Donny is the diminutive of Donald, i.e. Donald Trump, and land means, well, land. Donny's land. The logic of the Ukrainian side is legible. If a territory bears the name of the sitting US president, he will have a personal stake in defending it and advancing the broader concept in negotiations. The idea, one must admit, has a certain creative flair. But judging by results, it did not work. The Donetsk region remains the Donetsk region, and the negotiations continue in their familiar, grinding rhythm. To the actual events on this sector. The headline, fighting has broken out for Oleksandrivka. Russian units have advanced southwest of Kaliniki and are beginning to consolidate on the eastern outskirts of the settlement. Ukrainian published footage of FPV drone strikes against Russian positions within Oleksandrivka's boundaries simply confirms it. The troops are already inside and fighting to hold their footing. Simultaneously, Russian forces are pressing the western edge of Oleksandrivka with air bombs, artillery and tank fire from covered positions. The goal being to take the settlement in a pincer and open the road to the Siversky Donets River and the Siversky Donets, Donbas Canal. The opening of the battle for Oleksandrivka is effectively the opening chapter of the battle for Sloviansk. All the indicators suggest that chapter is now very close. Kostiantynivka sector, the encirclement threat. On the Kostiantynivka sector, the situation has shifted noticeably over the past 3 days. Comparing the map from April 19th to end of day April 22nd, we register Russian advances on two axes simultaneously, on the eastern outskirts of Kostiantynivka itself and on the southern approaches to Novodmitrivka. This is a critical node. A Russian push to Novodmitrivka creates a direct encirclement threat against the Ukrainian garrison holding Chervon, Mykolaiivka, Podilska, and the entire network of intermediate strongpoints in the area. If Russian units succeed in closing this ring, Ukrainian losses in this pocket could be catastrophic. Simultaneously, a steady stream of assault groups and heavy equipment is flowing from Bakhmut toward Kostiantynivka through Ivanivske from the east. The Ukrainian side is attempting to blunt this movement with FPV drone strikes, but the pressure is intensifying with each passing day. The Bakhmut corridor is once again becoming operationally relevant. Dobropilya. Direction beyond the agglomeration. On the Dobropilya axis, Russian units are completing their passage through Hryshin. The Russian Ministry of Defense has reported full advance through the settlement. The map in this sector is being updated in near real time. Russian positions are already pushing beyond Hryshin's boundaries, and the fighting has shifted to Novoalexandrivka, Vasilivka, and Myurn. In geographic terms, this means crossing beyond the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Russian forces are now looking in the direction of Dobropilya itself, the district administrative center. The pace on this sector remains among the highest along the entire front line, and the dynamics of recent days give no indication of a slowdown ahead. Zaporizhzhia sector, a line ready to break. The Zaporizhzhia sector today is arguably the most volatile in terms of expected near-term changes. Both sides are exchanging strikes, the situation is unstable, and the map appears ready for significant revision. A number of pro-Russian analysts are already reporting that Russian forces have secured control of roughly 40% of the southern portion of Verkhnya Tersa. Confirming footage and geolocated reference points are still being verified, but the simple fact that multiple independent sources are converging on this assessment simultaneously carries weight of its own. Meanwhile, an active assault is underway on Huliapol. Footage has been published of the TOS-1A Solntsepek heavy thermobaric system striking the town center. The use of TOS in an urban environment is not merely about causing damage. It is the fire preparation and psychological softening that precedes an infantry assault, burning out fortified basements, eliminating hardened fighting positions before the ground forces go in. If events continue along the current trajectory, the Huliapol-Verkhnya Tersa line could simply collapse in the near term. Its breach would open operational space for Russian units toward the northeastern outskirts of Kharkiv, and that represents a fundamentally different scale of threat to Ukrainian defenses on the Zaporizhzhia direction. Middle East, the big game in the Indian Ocean. Now to the Middle East and the surrounding waters, where what may be the most geopolitically consequential confrontation of the current moment is unfolding. Yesterday, US-Iran talks mediated by Pakistan in Islamabad fell apart before they began. The Iranian side communicated through Pakistani intermediaries that it would not be sending a delegation. The American reaction, publicly at least, was one of studied indifference. The blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, imposed on April 13th, remains fully in force. However, the blockade is showing characteristic cracks. Despite the American naval presence, at least 26 Iranian vessels have transited the strait since the blockade was announced. And by the latest figures, 34 tankers are now underway, apparently headed for Chinese and Indian ports. Today brought reports that Iran itself intercepted and stopped several tankers attempting to pass through the strait without complying with Iranian-established transit protocols. Control of the waterway remains a live and unresolved contest. Washington claims the blockade is costing Iran $500 million per day. The figure sounds formidable, but Tehran shows no signs of readiness to yield. This standoff, however, appears unlikely to remain static much longer. Analysts assess that the United States is awaiting the arrival of a third carrier strike group built around USS George Bush, currently transiting through the waters off Kenya. In a day or two, the group will enter operational range, and paired with USS Abraham Lincoln, American commanders will have considerably more options for decisive action. But the central question today is not Iran. The central question is China. Beijing finds itself in a deeply uncomfortable position. The US president has made a series of sharp public statements directed at China in the context of regional developments. Beyond the rhetoric, American forces recently stopped a vessel believed to be connected to Chinese ports, and according to the US president, cargo destined for Iran was discovered aboard, despite China's earlier assurances that such transfers had ceased. On April 20th, a tanker was boarded in the waters off Sri Lanka, carrying approximately 2 million barrels of Iranian crude, valued at around $200 million. The operation involved USS Miguel Keith and USS John Canley, with shipboard marine units conducting the actual boarding. The overall picture of American naval deployment in the region looks like this. One carrier strike group is positioned south of Iran. George Bush is moving through the Kenya corridor, likely bound for either the Yemen theater or the Arabian Sea. The Gerald Ford strike group, operating alongside the French Charles de Gaulle, is deployed west of Israel and Lebanon. Special operations forces are concentrating in the Sri Lanka area, positioned to intercept Chinese vessels on their outbound passage through the Strait of Malacca and Singapore Strait. Separately, the United States has signed a strategic defense agreement with Indonesia, effectively closing another passage into the Indian Ocean. The American grouping, together with its allies, now controls, directly or by proxy, every significant choke point leading into the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. What Iran, China, and Russia intend to do about this is, for now, an open question. The game being played in the Indian Ocean and the Strait of Hormuz may, in its geopolitical consequence, ultimately overshadow much of what is happening on land. We are watching closely. That brings today's briefing to a close. We have covered the key developments across multiple sectors: the conclusion of the battle for Kupansk, the formation of the double bridgehead aimed at Kharkiv Oblast, the opening of the fight for Alexandrivka as a prelude to Sloviansk, the encirclement threat on the Kostiantynivka sector, the fragile front line on the Zaporizhzhia axis, and the largest maritime standoff in the Indian Ocean, where questions of global supply chains and the limits of Chinese influence are being tested in real time. Gentlemen, once more, please subscribe and hit the bell. Without it, YouTube will simply not deliver these briefings to you. We publish every day, and your support is what keeps this channel running. Thank you for watching. Until the next briefing, stay sharp, stay safe.